Hello everyone, welcome to this tutorial. In the previous tutorial, we created a class which we are using for our users application that we are creating to allow users to log in and register. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create our connection to the database. What I'm doing is I'm going to create a new class, so new Java class. I'm going to call this DB Connect. Why am I calling it DB Connect? Because that's the name that I would like to call it. If you have any other name that you want to call it, you are definitely welcome to call it any name that you want. But for this purpose, I would like to call it DB Connect. So when I've created my DB Connect class, what I now need to do is I need to extend and use a class that would help me to be able to create this database connection. And that class is called SQLiteOpenHelper. So in order to do that, I need to extend SQLiteOpenHelper so that I can get access to its methods, properties, and all the other things. Because when you extend something, you now become the baby. So the baby now inherits things from the parent class. So if I do extends SQLiteOpenHelper. Now, when you extend SQLiteOpenHelper, you see that Android Studio will import the SQLiteOpenHelper for you, but it would also give you an error. And when you click on this bulb, it will tell you that there are some methods that are compulsory for us to implement if we are to use SQLiteOpenHelper. So I'm going to import those methods. And then you would think that that would be it, but no, Android Studio will tell you there's also another error. Why is that? Because we need a constructor. So if I click on this bulb, it tells me create constructor matching super. So when I click on it, I'm just going to choose the first one because we're going to change the constructor anyways. So what we've basically done is we've imported these compulsory methods which are required for us to be able to connect to our database. So what I'm going to do now is, this is my constructor. So this is a constructor. If you remember our user class, we had our own constructor, which we created ourselves. So Android Studio has its own constructor that I want us to use. That's coming from the SQLiteOpenHelper, but we can also make modifications to it. So what I want to do is I'm going to take away this. I don't need to use this. I'm just going to leave the context as the only argument for this constructor. And you see that I'm getting some errors. It's asking for a name. This name means the database name. This is a factory. I don't really use this, so I'm going to make it a null. And database version. So whenever you create your database, you need to add a version so that in case in the future your database changes, Android Studio will be able to recognize that, okay, when you first created a database version was #1, but this new one, when you've upgraded your application or updated the application, I can see that you've changed, you've said that that database version was version 1. This one is a version 2. So what it's going to do is it's going to compare them and realize that, okay, version 1, version 2, I'm going to stop using version 1 and I'm going to use version 2. So that's where the version comes from. But for this purpose, what I'm going to do is for this version, I'm going to create a variable or attributes. I'm going to be using that for that. So don't worry about these error messages for now. We're going to work with it. So first we need to do is, if we're going to connect to a database, we need to create a database name. So again, this is a class. So similar to our users class, we can create some attributes for it. So I'm going to create some attributes for it. So I'm going to do private static int, not int, private static string, because one of our DB name is going to be of a string. And I'm going to call it DB name. And the DB name, I'm going to call this, this database, I'm going to call it, let's give it any name. We don't want to call it register manager, just in case this application is not just going to be a user login and a registration. So maybe I want to call it this database name, find a friend manager. Let's write it this way, find friends manager. That's what I'm going to call my database, find friends manager. So find friends manager, and then remember I told you we have to create a database version. So private static int DB version equals to 1. I'm going to start with 1. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in the DB version for here. And you'll see that, okay, cool. It likes it. And again, I'm going to pass in the DB name. And I'm going to say passing it. And you realize that, oh, he also likes it. So now I need to create my columns. Now I can either create my columns when I'm creating my query, or I can create it because I'm going to be using those columns throughout. Maybe in this database class, I'm going to be using the same variable throughout and throughout. So the first thing I need to do is, remember we created one for, what we're going to create is going to be very, very similar to this here, of what we have here. So it's going to be a replica of it. I'm not going to copy it because I want to write it, because I think when I write it, when you write stuff, it really stores in your, for me, it helps me to remember anyways. And if you're a new user, I wouldn't advise you to start copying code now, because you might not understand what you're copying. If you understand it, it's fine to copy it, but if you don't understand it, it's better to write it so that you know exactly what to do. So I'm going to create my columns. So private static int, I'm going to call this ID equals this one. I'm just creating the column names that's going to be in our database. Actually, this should be of a string, not an integer. So these are the column names. You know, in every database, you have different tables, several tables. And those tables each will have columns in them. So this will be the ID where we actually store the ID of the user, which will separate that user. So, and then next thing I'm going to do is private static string. Let's call this the first thing. Remember, it's going to be similar to our users class. So if you get confused, if you're trying to remember it, let's just copy it here. I'm just copying. I'm not going to do anything, just so that I have reference to it. So let's say full name equals full name. Yeah, full name is fine. And then private static. You're probably wondering why not just copy this and just make it into that. I'm only using as reference. So you can do it if you want to, but I want to do it this way. Private static string. I want to do password equals password. These are just column names, by the way. So private static string DOB equals DOB. And then private static string, we can say phone number, and we can say phone number. And private static bio equals, this should be a string bio equals bio. Okay, so we have just finished creating our columns. Okay, let's move on. So once we finish creating our columns, now I want to go to our onCreate method, where we're actually about to create our query. Because if you've done SQL before, you know how to create queries. If you don't, I will just introduce you to it. So the first we need to do is we need to create a string, because our query is going to run in a string. So query string equals, and this is how you create tables in SQL, because when it runs SQL. This is SQL language that we're writing right now. So in SQL or SQLite, how do you create tables? We create tables by saying create table, and then usually you pass in the name of the table, etc. But because we have already created our variables of our database name, our database table, actually we didn't create a table. So let me just create a table here. Private static string DB table equals find friends. Actually, it shouldn't be called find friends. It should be called users. Okay, so when I come here, I just have to concatenate it and just add users. Did we save it? Okay, it's DB table, sorry. DB table, and then plus, and then now we have to create the columns. So the columns that we have currently is we have an ID. So again, I have the variable already. So I'm saying create column ID, make it into an integer, make it a primary key, and then also auto increment it. Beautiful. And then I need to pass in a comma. And then I need to do the same thing for the rest of them, where I'm going to be creating the rest of my other columns. So we have full name. Full name is going to be of a text. Always leave a space between here, because if you don't leave a space, it means that you're combining these two together. Without any space, it will think that you're creating something called full name text, which is not a column name. But if you leave space, we'll notice that, oh, okay, full name is the name, and this is what the data type that we want it to be. So text, and then again, we have to create the same thing for the rest of them. So email address, and then space, and then text, and then comma. And then again, we have password, and then space, text, and again, concatenate it again. So we do DOB, space, text, phone number, space, text, comma, and then don't be confused by this. It's only because I know what I'm doing already. That's why I'm able to do the concatenation. But concatenation is just because we're combining variables together with a string. We need to concatenate it. So literally what this is going to read is create table users. It's just that because it's a variable, that's how we have to combine variables and